Also guys, heads up, spoilers for Infinity War in this video. And at number 10, Loki and Natasha. Loki and Black Widow initially encountered one another during the first Avengers film. They had an amazing scene together where Loki seemingly gets into Natasha's head, only for her to reveal afterwards that it was all a sophisticated ploy to get information out of him about his plan, which she expertly executes, and then walks away, leaving Loki stunned. While ultimately it didn't foil Loki's getaway plans, it made for some interesting insight on Natasha's history in the MCU, and gave fans some interesting chemistry between the villain and the reformed Soviet spy. Natasha played him good, and he tried to get under her skin, and towards the end of their scene together, Loki gets straight up volatile with her. And of course, all of this made for some great shipping fodder. Two masters of manipulation coming together and getting it on? Yeah, I can see how that's pretty darn appealing. Up next, number 9, NATASHA. Natasha and Nick Fury. I think Natasha may be the most shipped character in the Avengers. She's got plenty of headships, plenty of femslash, and a fanon coupling with almost every other likable character, good and bad. And the Romanoff shipping even extends up to Nick Fury, who most see as a father figure to Black Widow. Oh god, I really hope there isn't fanfic out there where she refers to him as daddy. Ugh, cringe. This ship has quite a bit of evidence that has accumulated over time, but the most potent parts are because of their relationship depicted in Captain America Winter Soldier. Remember when we all thought Nick Fury bit the dust in Winter Soldier after that epic action sequence where Nick took on a crazy amount of enemies only to die on an operating table later? And remember Natasha's expression when she thought he was dying on that operating table? By that time in the MCU, Black Widow was becoming a more thoughtfully formed dynamic character, and we were starting to get more emotion slipping through the cracks of her stony exterior, something that the hardened spy didn't seem capable of only a few films prior. Up next, number 8, Winter Witch. Moving on to something hotter at this number, or colder, cause you know their ship name and Bucky is the Winter Soldier. Sorry, sometimes the dad in me just comes out and has to make a joke. Anywho, there's really not that much that the fans of Winter Witch ship have to go off of, unfortunately for them. The most that Bucky Barnes and Wanda Maximoff have interacted was in Captain America Civil War, with both of them being on Cap's side. But who knows, maybe they connected on the car ride over to the airport, getting buddy-buddy in the back seat, made out a little. Despite this, shippers have filled up Tumblr and Pinterest with photoshopped images of these two as a couple, often comparing similar moments the two have shared side by side. Bucky locked up in Civil War, Wanda locked up in Civil War, Bucky wearing a baseball cap, Wanda wearing a baseball cap, that kind of stuff. There's even blogs devoted to how hilarious Steve's reactions would be after him, being completely oblivious to the relationship, clued into what was going on. Perhaps these two are appealing to so many because they're both so troubled and traumatized. Who knows, maybe somewhere down the line Vision will be gone for good, and Bucky will slip into a more active role in the Avengers, and the two of them will develop the hots for one another. In our number 7 spot, FITZSIMMONS. Leo Fitz and Gemma Simmons. Jumping away from the movies of the MCU over to one of its series, FITZSIMMONS is the pairing of Leo Fitz and Gemma Simmons from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. You know, the show that Coulson popped up in and was like, hey, I'm actually still alive. Anywho, these two are Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the most popular ship on the show, and the only ship on this list that's actually canon. They got married. Fitz is one of the youngest agents on the team. He's a genius engineer, and is practically inseparable from Gemma right from the get-go. She's his best friend and research partner, hence why the two are often referred to as science babies or science twins. Gemma is a genius biochemist, and over the course of 5 seasons of the show, the romantic relationship has blossomed. It's had its will they won't they moments, along with other love interests floating around as distractions. But as any fan of the show will tell you, these two are a prime example of what an OTP should be. Up next, number 6, Stark Spangled Banner. This is perhaps the most dangerous threesome ever. Stark Spangled Banner is a menage a trois between Tony Stark, Steve Rogers, and Bruce Banner. I mean, come on, they're like the 3 best pals that there ever was. Sorry, Thor. You only get Thorky. It's pretty easy to see how this pairing comes together. All 3 bonded during the first 2 Avengers films quite heavily. Tony and Bruce together as colleagues, Steve and Tony as heads who butted often but have a profound amount of adoration for each other, and Steve and Bruce as, well, they're pals, and they work together real good, right? But look at all the fan art. Up next, number 5, HAWKWITCH. Clint Barton and Wanda Maximoff. The Clint and Wanda fanship sparked up after her brother Pietro sacrificed himself to save Clint and a young Sokovian boy in Age of Ultron. Clint would go on to name his son after Pietro, the boy's middle name that is. His first name is Nathaniel, after Natasha. Later in Civil War, Clint comes to Wanda's rescue at the Avengers Tower, running into a battle that he'd obviously lose with Vision in order to do so, of course under the commands of Captain America. Ever since, fans of this unusual pairing have started popping up, and it's easy to see how these two would have some solid chemistry, even if Clint is significantly older than the young and extremely powerful Sokovian, but to some that's just sexier. Up next, number 4, FREEBIRD. Steve Rogers and Sam Wilson. Of course this is a ship. Also known as Captain Falcon, Steve and Sam have quite the bromance, which originated after they met in Captain America Winter Soldier. Cap turned to Sam in a time of need. After S.H.I.E.L.D. was officially compromised and fell, he and Natasha didn't really have anywhere to turn, except for Sam. Sam offered up everything he could to help them, and and their cause, and became Falcon, willing to even sacrifice his life under Cap's command. And at times, Sam even seems jealous of Steve's relationship with Bucky, classic jealous boyfriend type, which is made for some great moments between him and the Winter Soldier. There's a ship there too. In at number 3, SHIELD wives, Natasha Romanoff and Maria Hill. For all of y'all asking about the thumbnail from our last video that had some pretty hot and heavy fan art between Natasha and Maria in it, well, here we go, pals. SHIELD wives is the coupling of Romanoff and Hill, the two most badass ladies of SHIELD. Still left alive, because you know, Peggy was a total boss. And she belongs with Steve. Come on. Sorry, all this shipping is getting to me. Anywho, these two are both seriously tough cookies. Brilliant on the battlefield, brilliant strategists, and brilliant agents. So naturally a fem/slash formed amongst fans, especially those craving to see more Maria Hill in the films. It's clear that Natasha and even Clint Barton all have quite the history with the head honcho agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., like Maria, Coulson, and Fury. So to believe that these two may have spent quite a bit of time bonding together in the past isn't totally out of the question. And the rest of the story? Well, that's all up to the fanfiction. And at number 2, Iron Widow, Tony Stark and Natasha Romanoff. Upon Black Widow's entry into the MCU during her first appearance in Iron Man 2, fans speculated that perhaps Tony's undeniable attraction to the spy moonlighting as Pepper's assistant would pan out to be something more. I mean, hey, who can blame them after watching this?
I promise you this is the only time I will ask you to sign over your company.
I need you to initial each box.
The flirtation may have been short-lived, but potent enough for some shippers to latch onto, with Natasha being a much fiery, more interesting alternative to Pepper when it comes to Stark's romantic interests. And you gotta admit, it'd be a pretty hot pairing, wouldn't it? Since the second Iron Man film, the two haven't really shown to have that much potent chemistry together, minus that great bit of banter between them in the Avengers Civil War film, you know, where they're all talking about the Accords and then she says that thing and he's all like. And finally, in at number 1, Iron Dad, Tony Stark and Peter Parker. Ships can be more than just romantic. Iron Dad is the perfect example of that. It's one of the sweetest and newest family ships to emerge from the MCU, and it's by far the most likely of this list to actually happen and become canon. Iron Dad is the pairing of Tony Stark and Peter Parker as a father-son family ship, which makes absolute perfect sense, doesn't it? The two have a long history together in the MCU, longer than most initially suspected actually, with Peter Parker joining the MCU in 2016 when Tom Holland debuted as the character in Captain America Civil War. But prior to that hilarious first encounter when Tony pays Parker a visit at his home in Queens, Tom Holland actually confirmed that Spider-Man was in Iron Man 2 as a young boy, pre-Spider-Man powers. Now remember that scene at the Stark Expo when a kid in an Iron Man mask stands up to one of the Hammer drones, lifting his hand up in the air? Well, theories have circulated for a long time on the internet that this kid was actually Peter Parker. The expo took place in Queens, and Peter clearly had a long time interest in technology, and is a big fan of Stark and Iron Man. Holland then confirmed that Marvel Studios had told him that that kid was in fact Peter. Really puts the timeline into perspective, doesn't it? Anyway, the father-spider-son ship between these two continues throughout Spider-Man Homecoming, which makes that moment in Infinity War when Peter clutches onto Tony as he's being dusted all the more painful to endure. And at number 10, ROMANOGERS. Back in Captain America Winter Soldier, the headship between Natasha Romanoff and Steve Rogers got some fuel for its fire. Cap and Black Widow made a great team, working together to unravel the mystery behind S.H.I.E.L.D. being compromised. Not only did they have some stellar banter, but they also shared a kiss, prompted by Natasha, as a way for them to become invisible when Strike hunted them down in a shopping mall. Oh, the chemistry. Despite the Natasha-Bruce Banner flirtation in Age of Ultron, fans of ROMANOGERS still have high hopes. By the end of Age of Ultron, the two begin training the Avengers recruits together, and in Civil War, despite being on opposite sides of the Sokovia Accords, Natasha is still there for Steve when Peggy Carter dies. And then in Infinity War, the two are working together again, and save Vision and Wanda from Proxima Midnight and Corvus Glaive. What have they been up to between Civil War and Infinity War? Playing tonsil hockey perhaps? Sorry, let's move on. And at number 9, Domestic Avengers. Moving on to a more adorable and platonic ship, the Domestic Avengers is a family ship, which, to be frank, isn't all that different from what we're used to seeing from the members of the Avengers back in Age of Ultron. The ship itself started after the first Avengers film, and many fans theorized that Stark Tower would become the Avengers Tower, and that became a pretty big basis for a lot of fanfics. Not only just for the Domestic Avengers, but other ships too. And then it became a reality, which is pretty great. Ever since the Sokovia Wars and Civil War, we haven't really gone to see the Domestic Avengers in full swing. Because let's be honest, fighting Thanos isn't really family bonding time. But the likelihood of us getting more Domestic Avengers moments is pretty high, even if it's with a few members missing from the team. But hopefully not. Who knows what will happen in Avengers 4. And at number 8, Capsicole. Remember how jazzed Phil Coulson was the first time he met Steve Rogers in the Avengers? Phil is most definitely a Captain America fanboy. He's got those adorable cards. And that affection for the Star-Spangled Hero is primarily what fuels the Steve Rogers-Phil Coulson ship. While these days Steve thinks Phil is dead, fans of the ship are hoping that Phil will make a glorious return, revealing himself to the initial Avengers team, and that Steve will be all wide-eyed and run into his arms and everything will be great. Oh, Coulson. And at number 7, Frost Iron. Frost Iron has some of the most devoted shippers out there. Have you guys seen the beautiful fan art that that people have made of them, it's some impressive stuff. Loki and Tony Stark don't have a whole lot of romantic chemistry in the films, but they do have that great scene in the first Avengers film where the two banter back and forth about Loki's plan, and Stark even offers him a drink. And while there isn't a ton to run with from the rest of the films, the fanfic alone of these two is pretty intense. What's not to love? Loki's sexuality in the comics is fluid, and Stark isn't one to shy away from something new, so who knows. Up next, number 6, T'Challkin, the cat and the bird. I see the appeal. T'Challkin is exactly that. A fanship that sprouted from a line that Sam Wilson says to T'Challa upon meeting him in Civil War. That line is then followed up by, "What? Dude shows up dressed like a cat and you don't want to know more? I think we know who wants to know more, Mr. Wilson. I think we do." While some fans have chosen to pair T'Challa with Bucky Barnes because of all their Civil War drama, others prefer this Civil War spawn couple instead. One user on Tumblr named Sam Wilson even posted this hilarious breakdown of how their relationship would spark up. I quote, "T'Challkin aside for just a minute, think about T'Challa trying to woo Sam away from Steve. T'Challa redesigning Sam's wings to make them faster, lighter, indestructible. Running laps around Steve when Sam invites him on their morning runs. Offering Sam some advanced combat training that's really an excuse to get down and dirty and sweaty. Full body drops where he ends up straddled on top of Sam. Him making Sam Wakanda delicacies and feeding them to him by hand. Yeah, I get the allure." And at number 5, Black Pepper. Black Pepper is the coupling of Pepper Potts and Black Widow. As you can guess, this femslash started up after Natasha's first appearance in Iron Man 2, when she was masquerading as Pepper's assistant and had this glorious introduction. Be the best of friends, but oh my, they would be the cutest couple. As one user named Underruzi posted, I quote, "Marvel Studios could make a film of only Shuri and Peter watching Vines on a couch, and Peter crying because it won't come back, and then Shuri buying it so that they can binge watch every iconic Vine on existence for 2.5 hours. And honestly, I would watch the hell out of that film 5 times on the same day for a week straight." Yeah, that's 2. Also, ship name suggestions, anybody? I've seen Science Buddies flown around, kinda like the new and improved Science Bros, but I feel like we could get a bit more creative than that. And at number 2, Thorky. Thorky is the shipping of Thor and Loki. It's totally fine because they're not actually brothers, you guys. Loki has always been Thor's main antagonist. That's how he was introduced in the comics, and for the first phase of the MCU, that was his role too. But after their work together in Thor: The Dark World, yes, the MCU film that we all wish was a whole lot better, the brothers became pretty good teammates, and this carried through into Thor Ragnarok. They trust each other. And then when Loki is killed by Thanos at the beginning of Infinity War, I said spoilers, oh god, the pain that rifles through Thor is almost too much. The relationship has grown so much over the last almost decade, and if the fan art and fanfic is any indicator, shippers hope that we'll see this bromance transform into a romance. Or at least, further their relationship even more. Loki will come back. Tom Hiddleston is actually contracted to come back in Avengers 4, so he'll be there. And lastly, in our number 1 spot, Iron Strange, aka Awesome Facial Hair Husbands. Another very recent ship to set sail in the hearts of MCU fans is the pairing of Doctor Strange and Iron Man, known as Iron Strange, or Awesome Facial Hair Husbands, if you're going by the comics. Dear god, how perfect are they? While it may look like a blossoming bromance to some, others see it as a blossoming romance between two very different yet two very similar powerful intellectuals. Prior to Avengers Infinity War, fans were really hyped about how Stephen Strange and Tony Stark would interact with one another. Fans of the comics are no stranger to the duo's banter in the panels, and it more than translated onto the screen, with the two characters annoyed with one another at first, but then working together, along with the members of the Guardians and Spider-Man, to execute an almost perfect plan against Thanos on Titan. It fails because of Star-Lord. But we did get to see Doctor Strange save Stark's life, which was likely concerning a very important plot point for the next Avengers film, but still gave fans of the ship some necessary fuel for their Iron Strange fires. And at number 10, Iron Husbands. Rhodey and Tony are a pretty obvious ship. The two pals not only care a whole lot about each other, but have some of the best back and forth banter in the MCU. James Rupert Rhodes was introduced in Iron Man, one of Stark's best friends and occasional rivals, and became the liaison between Stark Industries and the US Armed Forces. This eventually leads to Rhodes becoming War Machine after he pops on one of Tony's suits of armor at his birthday party to stop a drunk suited up Tony from potentially hurting partygoers and himself. That little rivalry would expand and resolve, with their friendship continuing to remain a staple in Tony's life throughout the rest of the MCU films. Remember how distraught Tony was when Rhodes was severely injured in Civil War? Aw, heart-wrenching. Plus, who couldn't fall for Don Cheadle? He's like super adorable. And at number 9, Loki. Loki and Agent Coulson is a super minor ship in the MCU, but we had to include it on this list because of how wonderful it is. This ship stems from the moment where Loki killed Coulson during his escape from the helicarrier. Bit of an odd starting point, but considering the lines that Coulson whips out on Loki while he's dying, I can see the chemistry. And what better way to start a ship but with an antagonistic past between the two? He killed Coulson shot him through a wall. Typical roots of a romance, right? That's how most relationships start. Coulson would later be resurrected, and spoilers, after Infinity War, it's uncertain if Loki's death will be a permanent one. So hey, who knows? Maybe these two might cross paths again sometime in the future. Up next, number 8, HAWKSON. Yep, we've got another Coulson ship at this number, this time between him and Hawkeye. Also known as Flint, Clint Clint Barton and Phil Coulson's ship stems from one interaction between the two of them in the MCU films in the first Thor movie, when Phil speaks to Clint over the radio about what he's got eyes on outside of the research center prior to Thor failing to lift his hammer. This got fans thinking that there must be a bigger backstory and some sort of past between the two, with Clint being an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Coulson essentially being his and Natasha's handler. Ooh, the possibilities. And at number 7, Scarlet America. When watching Captain America's Civil War, one can't help but notice how adamant Steve Rogers is towards everyone giving Wanda Maximoff a chance. Yeah, she's a little unstable. Yeah, she needs to learn how to control her powers better, but regardless, Steve has never treated her like a child, and is always in her corner. So, of course, there's a fanship brewing there. And their relationship in the comics has also helped fuel that fire. But in those storylines, Steve broke her heart, and she didn't take it too well, warping reality with her powers in the events leading up to the Avengers Disassembled story event. Up next, number 6, Science Boyfriends. Aside from having the best ship name ever, Science Boyfriends, aka Tony Stark and Bruce Banner, is actually a pretty fitting title. The two are the scientific experts on the team, prior to Shuri making her debut in Black Panther and putting their work to shame in Infinity War though. The duo work together often to tackle major problems together by combining their intellects. And yeah, knowledge is pretty damn sexy, so no wonder Science Boyfriends is one of the more popular pairings out there on the interwebs. Plus, let's not forget the great scene in Age of Ultron where Tony dons his Hulkbuster suit to try to tame an out-of-control Hulk. And if you take that in the context of their ship, it's kind of like the cutest thing ever. And at number 5, CLINTASHA. Ooh. Clint Barton and Natasha Romanoff are a clear shipping choice. The two have a long history with one another, with both of them trusting each other immensely. Natasha denies the two have something romantically going on, but shippers often consider that as part of the fanon, stating that she's in denial about her own feelings. Fans even noticed that she was wearing an arrow necklace in the Winter Soldier film. While in the MCU, it's incredibly unlikely that the couple will ever be a thing, considering Clint has an adorable family which was revealed in Age of Ultron, the two at least have one of the best friendships in the movies. And I mean, they previously hooked up, so there's something there. And it's hard not to love it when both of them share the screen together regardless. And at number 4, we have STEGGY. STEGGY is the relationship that could have been. Steve Rogers and Peggy Carter are each other's the one that got away. Steve was frozen, returning decades later after Peggy had lived quite the long life, making the moment when they reunite all that more gut-wrenching. And when Peggy passes in Civil War, it's hard not to shed a tear. Steve loved her dearly, and she loved him, although him moving on to her great niece Sharon Carter was kinda, well, a little weird. Up next, number 3, STONY. Steve Rogers and Tony Stark have one of the most complex and interesting relationships in the MCU. Just take a look at any of their scenes together in Civil War. Having different perspectives often makes them rivals, but deep down the two care a lot about one another, and their ability to work together in a team is obviously undeniable. While we didn't get to see them reunited in Infinity War, there's still hope for them in the future. But oh man, that scene where Tony is about to call Steve, but then doesn't, is just like, gut puncher. A relationship between these two isn't entirely unheard of in the comics either. Sort of, that is. On Earth 3490, Cap is romantically linked with that Earth's Iron Man, also known as Iron Woman, Natasha Stark. Slightly defeats the purpose of the MCU ship if the genders are swapped though. The Civil War storyline went down a little differently on that Earth too, needless to say. It actually never happened, because they just resolved their differences in the bedroom. In addition to that, moving back to the male versions of both of the characters, the two are part of another great ship known as the Super Family, a family ship between Steve, Tony, and Peter Parker, where they've adopted young Peter and raised him together. Up next, number 2, Scarlet Widow. Scarlet Widow is the femme/pairing of Black Widow and Scarlet Witch, and is definitely not to be confused with the Superman villain who appeared in his 1945 radio show, although I don't really see how you could confuse them. Scarlet Widow and female ships in general when it comes to the Avengers isn't overly apparent. You don't see nearly as much of it as you do on the interwebs as you do with the Slash ships and the regular ships. That being said, once you scratch the surface, there's a whole lot of fanfic written for this pairing. And hey, it makes sense. Black Widow is a calculating and often cold assassin, and Wanda, in her earlier appearances in the MCU, is wickedly powerful but emotionally unstable. The two are pretty opposite personality-wise, and the only ladies on the team. Plus, Scarlett Johansson and Elizabeth Olsen did this photo shoot together, and this is how Scarlet Widow fans took it. Yeah, that's pretty great. Despite the two characters having romantic ties in the films with other characters, Bruce Banner and Vision, those who ship Scarlet Widow are still pretty adamant, even if the pair may only ever be realized in fanfic stories. And last but not least, in our number 1 spot, STUCKY. STUCKY is the Slash pairing between Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes, and is perhaps the most popular of Avengers ships. There's a whole lot of evidence here for fans to delve into. Bucky and Steve have always been partners in justice, and despite being separated for decades upon decades, the two still have such a potent connection. And when Bucky returned as the Winter Soldier, Steve was willing to die when trying to reach into Bucky's mind for whatever was left of his best friend. And Steve never gives up on him. I mean, hell, Civil War was further perpetuated because of this relationship with Bucky, with Steve willing to be on his side even if he had killed T'Challa's father, which he didn't, and he was right, thankfully. And spoilers, that moment in Infinity War when Bucky calls out to him and turns to dust, and Steve is just like utterly destroyed. I mean, Bucky is the last remaining part of Steve's past, of his life before Captain America, and even if you don't agree that there's some sort of romantic love brewing there, it's undeniable that Steve loves Bucky dearly, and vice versa.